Part 26. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 251. Chapter 251. What happened to the boy taking the blame? It was almost familiar. Aunt Lu looked at the watch on her wrist and said, "Madam, let me go to the kitchen to cook first. I heard from Mr. Lu that you have not been in good health recently. I will make some porridge and you can try my cooking by the way." Okay. Lin 11 nodded and let her go. When Aunt Lu went to the kitchen, Zhang Wanan and Luzes who moved next to Lin 11. Lin 11 looked up at them and asked, "What are you trying to do again?" She always felt that nothing good could happen between the two of them. Zhang Wanan showed her small white teeth and looked at Lin 11 with a smile. "Mom, I think this aunt is pretty good. You don't have to fiddle around in the kitchen anymore." "Yes, the smoke will hurt the skin," Luzes who agreed hastily. "What do you mean? Do you two dislike me?" Lin 11 looked in disbelief. No, 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 we love Mom very much," Zhang Wanan said, grabbing Lin 11's neck and rubbing into her arms. Lin 11 smiled and touched her head and asked, "How is your study progress?" "What are you afraid of if I'm here?" Luzes who confidently answered for Zhang Wanan. Tisk, tisk, arrogance, blind confidence." Lin 11 was disdainful. "It's not that I'm arrogant, nor that I'm blindly confident. If you don't believe me, we'll just see if Anan can go to the same school with me in 1 year. Okay, let's talk about the same school. Are you two still interested in studying?" Lin 11 looked at them suspiciously and asked. Luzes who and Zhang Wanan looked at each other hesitantly. After a while, Zhang Wanan opened his mouth and spit out the word "you" dryly. "Yes, learning is learning, it's different from other things. You don't have to worry about this. I will control both of us." "Okay, let's see how well you perform. Mom believes in you," Lin 11 said. She is still very relieved about her two children. The two of them should not delay their studies because of those things. If they delay, Luzes who will have to bear the blame. "Well, boys, what's wrong with taking some of the blame?" Mom has been busy these past 2 days, right? She hasn't come here to eat in a few days." Zhang Wanan was talking about Tang Yu. "Well, I called you last night. It's true that I'm a little busy, but your mother can have a rest after I go there in 2 days. Then I'll take her here for dinner and then stay here." "Okay," Zhang Wanan clapped her hands excitedly. While waiting for the meal, the three of them sat on the sofa. Luzes who was grading papers that Zhang Wanan had written, while the mother and daughter were obsessed with the male and female protagonists in the TV series. Aunt Lu didn't seem to be very familiar with everything in the kitchen, or maybe she was in a hurry. Lin 11 heard the sound of collisions from the kitchen several times. "I originally wanted to take a look, but I was afraid of scaring Aunt Lu who had just arrived, so I held back." Fortunately, lunch was cooked smoothly. When Aunt Lu served each dish, Lin 11 looked at it and saw that it looked good, but she didn't know how it would taste. "Aunt Lu, let's sit down and eat together," Lin 11 invited. "Yeah, sit down and eat." Zhang Wanan was also very enthusiastic. Aunt Lu hurriedly waved her hand to refuse. "We have a rule that you cannot eat with your employer. You eat first and I will eat later." "What are you afraid of?" "That's your rule. My family's rule is to treat everyone equally." Before Mrs. Wang had eaten with us." Lin 11's voice was a little weak at the end, so weak that Aunt Lu could only hear a little bit. After a lot of psychological struggle, Aunt Lu was finally willing to sit down. When she sat down, she said sheepishly, "I'm not very familiar with it. When I first came here, I was busy cooking. I just dropped a lot of things in the kitchen. I don't know if this food is to your taste." Lin 11 had a better impression of Aunt Lu. She took the initiative to acknowledge the collision in the kitchen just now. End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 252. Chapter 252. How absurd. "It's okay, Just get familiar with it a little more. Let's start eating, Lin 11 said with a smile. Lin 11's smile was very healing. Aunt Lu, who was a little nervous at first, felt less nervous when she saw her smile. This was mainly because Lin 11 was easy to get along with. Unlike the people she had served before, they were arrogant and looked down upon. Aunt Lu sighed and watched Lin 11 take off her chopsticks, and she followed suit and picked up a piece. Soon her cooking skills were praised. Not bad, the taste is just right, Aunt Lu, you are really good at cooking, Lin 11 couldn't help but praise. Really? I was afraid you wouldn't like it, Aunt Lu blushed at the praise, like a child in kindergarten who was praised by the teacher. If it tastes good, please eat more. Mr. Lu asked me to cook the porridge for you, which will be ready in a while. I don't know how it tastes, Aunt Lu said. Aunt Lu, you may not be too unsure of yourself. How can you not be confident that your food is so delicious, Lin 11 said. Yes, my mother's cooking is terrible, but she is very confident. Zhang Wanan couldn't help but complain about Lin 11. Zhang Wanan's words made Aunt Lu laugh, but considering Lin's eyes, she didn't act too presumptuously. The four of them had lunch happily. Lazy pig Zhang Wanan went to take a nap on time, while Luzes who locked a recently released TV series and ran to catch up on it. He wanted to watch it and tell it to his dear Anan. The little girl is so busy now that she has little time left to watch TV. She is really tired from going to school with Luzes who. Luzes who sat down on the carpet beside the bed, watching the video while guarding his little mistress, making sure that the little girl didn't make any mistakes. Xiao's Huzi, how old am I this year? Zhang Wanan couldn't help but ask, half asleep when she saw Luzes who was seriously following the drama. Luzes who looked up at her, why do you ask this question so suddenly? Don't you know? Yes, I just want to know why Dad hasn't come back even though I'm getting older every year. Where has he gone? Doesn't he miss me and Mom? Zhang Wanan asked in a muffled voice, hiding behind the quilt. She thought of Lao Zhang again. Did he go to a faraway place like Mrs. Wang? Zhang Wanan asked again when Luzes who didn't answer. Probably Zhang Wanan's words came true, and Luzes who was stunned and didn't know what to answer. He was Luzes who used to talk eloquently in debates, but now he was silent when faced with the little girl's questions. I'm going to fall asleep if you don't answer me, Zhang Wanan couldn't help but urge him. Luzes who has already sorted out what he wants to say, but he will never lie to others. When he lies to others, he will stare at one place, just like now he is staring at his notebook. But fortunately, Zhang Wanan hid behind the quilt and didn't look at him. Luzes who became a little bolder, Uncle will be back. Maybe the way home is long and complicated and he can't find it for a while. Let's just wait. Maybe one day you will open the door and bump into your uncle. Yeah. Yes, Luzes who asked and answered himself. Oh, Zhang Wanan replied weakly without saying another word. Because she was covered with a quilt, and Luzes who felt guilty and did not dare to look at her, he had no idea that the little girl was hiding behind the quilt with tears streaming down her face. She thought, how ridiculous, because there has been no verification, so she no longer believes what they say, and she is no longer the child she was when she was a few years old. She is not so easy to be deceived now. She is about to enter junior high school, university, society. How quickly time passes year after year. Who would keep listening to their lies, unless she is really stupid? Zhang Wanan fell asleep thinking silently. Luzes who originally thought he could watch the drama well, suddenly felt so tortured that no matter how exciting the plot on the screen was, he couldn't watch it anymore. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 253. Chapter 253. I have something to say. The little girl is not stupid, how can she continue to live in their lies? Maybe it's time to find a suitable opportunity to tell her the truth. Loses who sighed and put the computer on the carpet aside. He turned his head and looked at the little girl quietly. After a while, he slowly stood up and tiptoed out. He walked over and knocked on Lin 11's door. No one answered. He turned and walked downstairs. Sure enough, Lin 11 was sitting on the sofa reading a magazine. "Mom, I have something to tell you," he walked over and said. Lin 11 looked back at him, closed the book and put it aside and said, "What's the matter? Tell me." Loses who didn't beat around the bush and went straight to the point. "Anan just asked me about Uncle Jong again." After Loses who said this, he looked up at Lin 11 and found that her expression was a bit ugly. She frowned and waited for Loses who to continue. She is no longer a child now, and she is not that easy to deceive. Why not find a suitable opportunity to tell her the truth? If you are not willing to be the one to tell her the truth, then let me do it, Loses who seriously. After Loses who finished speaking, he kept looking at Lin 11. Lin 11 pursed her lips tightly and seemed to be thinking about something. After a while, she said, "I will discuss it with your father tonight and I will tell her as soon as possible." Loses who nodded. "I went upstairs and she was still sleeping." Lin 11 nodded and let him go. She also knew that keeping it a secret like this was not an option. Lin 11 took Lu Lin back to his room when he got home in the evening. "I have to tell you something." Her serious expression made Lu Lin feel very uncomfortable. "You say?" Lin 11 recounted what Loses who said that morning and his own thoughts. Lu Lin squinted his eyes and nodded after listening. "Where's Tang Yu?" "Have you asked her for her opinion?" Lu Lin asked. "You still have the nerve to ask? If you don't let me go, my family will be so busy that they won't come to our place to eat for several days without seeing me," Lin 11 said to him fiercely. Yes, I'll let you go in a few days, right?" "Huh, that's pretty much it," Lin 11 snorted coldly. "How is it? Is the new aunt satisfied?" Lu Lin asked. "Well, it's pretty good," Lin 11 nodded. As the two were talking, Aunt Lu hurried up and knocked on the door. "Enter." "Sir and madam, someone downstairs said he was your friend, named Tang. I was not sure so I stopped him first." Aunt Lu reported the situation. "Your last name is Tang?" It was here as soon as she said it, Lin 11's face lit up. "It's okay, just let her in when she comes from now on, we are all a family," she said to Aunt Lu. Although Aunt Lu was a little confused, she still nodded to show that she understood. Aunt Lu followed Lin 11 downstairs. When Lin 11 got downstairs, she saw Tang Yu standing at the door looking tired and helpless. "I'm sorry, Miss Tang, I don't know, I'm really sorry." Aunt Lu hurried over and apologized. "I don't know if Aunt Lu is new here today," Lin 11 also helped to explain. Tang Yu pulled his lips tiredly and smiled. "It's okay, I'm very safety conscious." "Are you tired these 2 days?" "You're tired. I'll go back soon. Just hold on." Lin 11 walked over and supported Tang Yu. "It's okay, I just haven't been able to sleep well recently, and I'm really tired today. Let's come to your house for a meal." She didn't know what was going on recently. Her sleep quality was extremely poor. She couldn't sleep well. The slightest movement would wake her up, and the whole night would become a torment. "Let's eat. Which one of us will follow the other? Anan still misses you. I'll call her down." "Okay, I'll go sit down first." Lin 11 helped Tang Yu to the corner of the stairs and went upstairs while Tang Yu walked to the living room and sat down. End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 254. Chapter 254. Let's talk now. After Tang Yu sat down, Aunt Lu quickly brought a cup of tea and apologized for his behavior just now. Tang Yu smiled and said, "It's okay. Just go and do your work and don't worry about me." Aunt Lu nodded and turned around to leave. "Mom, An excited voice came from upstairs. Tang Yu felt her fatigue reduced by half the moment she was called by this voice. She smiled and turned back to stretch out her arms towards Zhang Wanan. Zhang Wanan ran towards her like a dumpling with a smile on his face and rushed into her arms. "Mom, are you tired?" Zhang Wanan got into Tang Yu's arms and asked, raising her head. "When Mom sees you, she feels like all the fatigue of the day has disappeared," Tang Yu said, holding her little hand. Her hands were smeared black from writing too much. Maybe she ran down before she could wash them when she heard her coming. Aunt Lu, who had just taken a few steps, was a little confused. In the morning, Zhang Wanan was still the child of her mistress, but how could she become this woman's child in the afternoon? Why does she feel that this relationship is a bit complicated? Also, when she was working in the living room at noon, she vaguely heard some of the conversation between Lu Zizhu and Lin 11. At that time, she was also a little confused and had no idea what was being said, but she vaguely seemed to know what was being said. Maybe it's because she didn't know much when she first came here, but she'll get to know more as time goes by, or maybe she doesn't need to know a lot about other people's lives and just needs to do her job well. Aunt Lu thought that she had already gone far away, leaving only the laughter coming from the sofa over there from time to time. Zhang Wanan was fussing with Tang Yu carelessly for a while, then somehow she remembered the idea for the question she just asked. Perhaps an idea flashed through her and she pulled Lu Zizhu up to say hello to Tang Yu and ran away. In her eyes, nothing is more important than studying. When you grow up, you know how to study. Tang Yu smiled and felt very relieved to see her running upstairs. "Ayu, come up with me. I have something to talk to you about," Lin 11 said seriously and stood up to leave. Tang Yu was stunned for a moment and smiled. "Why is it so serious?" "I'll tell you when I come up." Tang Yu nodded and followed without asking any more questions. Lin 11 took her into the study and locked the door as soon as she entered. Tang Yu felt more and more that the matter was serious and frowned tightly. When he came to Lu Lin, who was reading the documents, Tang Yu looked at the two people and asked again, "What's going on?" "I'm afraid and can't hide it anymore." "Let's tell her sometime," Lin 11 said calmly. Tang Yu raised his eyebrows slightly after hearing this, nodded and sat down and said, "I should have guessed it a long time ago. She is no longer a child." "Yes, that's what it's said. She's no longer a child, so it's hard to be deceived, but I don't know if she can bear it at her current age. Maybe if she has no impression of her father, she won't have a big reaction?" None of them knew, they could only wait and see her reaction when the news came out. "Then do you have any ideas? Do you want to find a day to tell her?" "I'm afraid of long nights and many dreams," Lin 11 said. "Well, let me think about it again." After speaking, Tang Yu turned his head to the side and took a deep breath. Actually, to be honest, she has not let go of Lao Jiang's death. She even often dreams about him these days. Let's not say that Zhang Wanan has no feelings for him, but after all, he is the father she has been looking forward to for a long time, the father she has dreamed of seeing. But if she knew that her father had passed away, would she be upset too? Sad. But keeping it secret is obviously not an option. Tang Yu sat for a while and suddenly stood up. "I'll go talk now." Lu Lin and Lin 11 were both shocked by her decision. They didn't expect it to be so sudden. End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 255. Chapter 255. Finally in a school. But Tang Yu had already walked out while he was in a daze. Over such a long period of time, she has long since trained herself into a strong woman, and has long since developed a character that speaks one thing. I am afraid she made the decision just now after careful consideration. She is also a victim. She is not a selfish person. She is also a qualified mother who will not make decisions casually, let alone when it comes to Zhang Wanan. If you really didn't think clearly, you wouldn't have stood up so decisively. When Lin 11 and Lu Lin quickly followed out, they found Tang Yu standing in front of Lu Zizhu's room door with one hand holding the door handle. The door was only opened a crack. She was hesitating. Lin 11 took a step forward. How about? Why don't you wait any longer? Tang Yu turned around and interrupted her. She was timid and afraid that Zhang Wanan would be sad and treat her like a liar. Wait. Lin 11 was also worried. Tang Yu pulled the door back again, closed it, turned around and went downstairs. Lin 11 then followed, leaving Lu Lin standing at the door at a loss. Dad, what are you doing standing at the door? Lu Zizhu heard a movement at the door and walked out to check. When he opened the door, he saw Lu Lin. Lu Lin pointed to the study room blankly. Work. Lu Zizhu nodded without any doubt, closed the door and went back. Asterisk. Originally, I wanted to hide it and tell Zhang Wanan when I found a suitable opportunity, but I kept it secret for another 2 years. Zhang Wanan is 12 years old and Lu Zizhu is 17 years old. Zhang Wanan's hard work during the summer vacation was not in vain. When she was in 5th grade, her grades improved by leaps and bounds. Zhang Baihui was so surprised that she was frightened. He Chiu and Su Jiaojiao thought she was stimulated by something, but in the end they found out that it was because of love. He made a sound and stayed away from her. In the end, Zhang Wanan was admitted to the junior high school of Lu Zizhu's school with good results. 2 people can finally go to the same school. Zhang Wanan entered junior high school with a better schedule than Lu Zizhu entered high school after passing the high school entrance examination. Lu Lin was preparing to throw a big banquet that day, but Zhang Wanan stopped her. She said that it was nothing, and that it would be better to stay for a grand banquet. On the day she married Lu Zizhu. Lu Lin agreed with a smile. On the first day of school, the 2 of them had a whim, and instead of asking the driver to take them directly to the school gate, they dropped them off at a place that was only 10 minutes away from the school. After getting off the car, Zhang Wanan shook Lu Zizhu's arm and walked all the way, calling him his senior brother along the way. Brother Shui, please take good care of me in the future. Brother Shui, you must protect me in school from now on and keep me safe. Brother Shui, come to the junior high school to play with me more often. Brother Shui, I can go to the high school to play with you. Brother Shui, how about I go on stage to perform at the New Year party? Brother Shui, are there any good-looking boys in school? I want to have more boys. Lu Zizhu listened to what she said, and the school brothers along the way became impatient, but in the end, he found that the little girl was not only older and taller, but also bolder. Are you actually thinking of finding other little brothers? It's like eating what's in the bowl and looking at what's in the pot. How audacious. Zhang Wanan, if you do something bad when you go to school, I will definitely not let you go. He stopped and threatened her by pinching her chin with gritted teeth. Not only did Zhang Wanan feel no pain, but she smiled so charmingly that Lu Zizhu couldn't help but tremble in his heart. Lu Zizhu blushed just 2 seconds after meeting her eyes. He let go of her and walked uncomfortably in front. She discovered that the little girl became more and more beautiful as she grew older. It was heartwarming to look at her. Her eyes that hid the stars in the sea seemed to be able to people in, and then they could not help but fall in love with her. Zhang Wanan jumped after him and hung her arm in his arm again like a pendant. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 256. Chapter 256. Your explanation is so far-fetched. Zhang Wanan jumped after him and hung her arm in his arm again like a pendant. Brother Shui, please take care of me, Zhang Wanan said again with a smile. I know. Lu Zizhu smiled fondly at her. As he approached the school gate, Lu Zizhu pointed at the school and asked, do you want to be famous? Huh, Zhang Wanan was puzzled. Loses who looked at the two people's arms hanging together, then looked inside the school and said, "If you don't want to be famous, the two of us will just walk in. If you want to be famous, the two of us will just walk in like this." "I want to be popular," Jongwanan said with a smile as his mind suddenly changed. Loses who was so angry at her that he was speechless and patted her head lightly as punishment. In the end, the two of them let go of their hands and just walked side by side. "I'll see Jiao Jiao and He Chiu again soon," as well as Zhongbai Hui. Zhongwanan looked at the teaching building with hopeful eyes. Su Jiao Jiao originally couldn't get into the school with her grades, just like she was at that time, but later, under the pressure of He Chiu, she studied hard and finally lived up to Tathagata and Qing, and scored 20 points higher than the original score line. "I also came in based on my ability. I can understand that you miss your little sister, but what do you want two men to do?" Loses who knocked the jealous bottle over again and hit her on the head again angrily. Jongwanan covered her head in pain and looked at Loses who fiercely, but she couldn't beat Loses who in terms of height, and she was defeated in just 10 seconds. "We are all good friends." She covered her head and couldn't defend herself. "This time we are assigned to the same class again. Do you think it's magical or not? Is it fate? Your fate was exhausted the moment you met me." "What kind of fate is not fate?" "No," Loses who directly denied it. "Domineering," Jongwanan muttered softly. "You must study hard when you come to the new school. Don't live up to my expectations of you. Don't mess around," Loses who said seriously. But Jongwanan didn't understand Feng Cheng. He curled his lips and looked around in a circle and asked, "What about you?" "I'm also studying hard. I'm your role model." He raised his eyebrows and said proudly. "Forget it, haven't you seen the way the people around you look at you? They're so squinting." Jongwanan curled her lips and said. If she hadn't come to this school, she wouldn't have known that Loses who was so popular, like a tempting piece of meat, and those who peeked at him were predators like lions and leopards. "I didn't pay attention, maybe it was because I was looking at you." "Huh? Looking at me? A bunch of women looking at me? I'm afraid they have some special fetish. Maybe it's because you're too cute. Your explanation is so far-fetched." "Well, I'm just too charming," I admitted. Loses who shrugged and said sincerely, spreading his hands. The two people were talking and had arrived at the door of the classroom. The classroom where Jongwanan was located was known from the report the day before, but he didn't go to see it. He only glanced at the name on the bulletin board from a distance. After reading it, Loses who took Jongwanan and left. He is very familiar with this place and can still find it in just one classroom. "Class 6, Class 9, here they are." Loses who stopped at the door of a classroom. Jongwanan took a deep look, then poked his head out and waved his hand to Loses who and said, "I already know, Xiao's Huzi, please step aside first." "Is it me again? And drive him away when you're done with him. Is he so worthless to use again? He, woman." Jongwanan saw that Loses who didn't go up to poke him, and reminded him, "Let's go." "I know, you don't need to remind me," he replied angrily. "You haven't forgotten where your class is, have you? It's just a holiday. I have a good head, and I am not as retarded as you. I'll see you go in before leaving." Oh, Jongwanan nodded and slipped in. End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 257. Chapter 257. It's time to go home. Loses who watched from the window as the little girl ran to the last row. Su Jiao and He Chai ran towards her before they put down their school bags. I don't know what they said, but the three of them suddenly looked up to the sky and laughed, looking very excited. Loses who shook his head helplessly and prepared to leave. "Huh, Loses who, what are you doing at the door of our class?" came a familiar voice. Loses who turned around and saw a familiar face. It was an old man, his head teacher in junior high school. "Is it you, teacher? It wasn't you in yesterday's report." Loses who was a little surprised. Yesterday something happened and I asked another teacher to take over the class. What were you doing? Come to the freshman class to flirt with girls, the teacher said and looked into the classroom, which had a good atmosphere. Loses who rolled his eyes inwardly, do you think I look like that kind of person? The teacher looked him up and down and nodded seriously, saying, it's quite similar. Okay, hurry up and go back to class. It's almost time. The old man raised his hand and looked at his watch and said. Loses who nodded, took one last look from the window, and left with his bag on his back. The old man looked at Loses who's walking back and smiled helplessly. In the classroom of grade 9, grade 6. The teacher fell silent as soon as he walked into the classroom. Today is the first day of school. As a class teacher, it was natural for him to have something to say. First he said a few words to adjust the atmosphere. When the atmosphere became better, the teacher started to talk about some rules in the school. After the head teacher finished speaking, he started waiting for class. The first class was not the class teacher's class, so he said a few words and only gave some important instructions before leaving. While waiting for class, Zhang Wanan called Su Jiaojiao across the aisle, why hasn't Zhang Baihui come yet? He shouldn't be late, right? I don't know, maybe it's a special situation. Just to add a word silently, he didn't come even after reporting yesterday. He Chiu, who was sitting next to Su Jiaojiao, said. Su Jiaojiao glanced at him with disgust, turned around and said to Zhang Wanan, if Zhang Baihui doesn't come, I'll go over and sit with you. Originally, she was just sitting in this seat. Before the teacher officially changed her seat, she could have gone and sat with Zhang Wanan. Anyway, she was tired of sitting with He Chiu for so many years. Who knew that this time she would be in the same school again? Class. She was really fed up with He Chiu. She couldn't just sit in the same seat in the same school by coincidence all her life. Zhang Wanan nodded hesitantly and muttered in a low voice, I don't think I won't come. Just when the school bell rang, class started. Perhaps every school will have a self-introduction in the first period of every class on the first day of school, and this time is no exception. After introducing myself, the time was almost gone. The teacher talked a little more with the classmates to get closer, and the class was over. Today's class was completed with self-introduction, one introduction after another, and Zhang Baihui was not seen all day long. Zhang Wanan sat in the last row, holding her chin and barely managing to get through the day in a daze. When school was over in the afternoon, Su Jiaojiao went over and patted her on the shoulder, school is over. Zhang Wanan opened her eyes, checked the time, picked up her bag and left. Let me sit at the same table with you tomorrow, Su Jiaojiao asked, following behind. What table are we sharing? What should we do when Zhang Baihui comes? He Chiu slapped her on the head vigorously. Can't he sit at the same table as you? Su Jiaojiao turned around angrily and tried to kick him, but was dodged. Zhang Wanan was walking in front and stopped to look at the two people who were fighting again with helpless expressions on their faces. And someone called her. Zhang Wanan turned around and saw Luzes who walking towards her, in the opposite direction to the flow of people. Jojo, Zhang Wanan shouted playfully, imitating Luzes who's call to her. Luzes whose face darkened and he waved to her, come here, it's time to go home. End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 258. Chapter 258. Are two enough? It's time to go home. How great. Zhang Wanan often lives with Luzes who now because Tang Yu is busy with work and has to travel frequently. However, Zhang Wanan hopes that many years later after they work, Luzes who will pick her up from get off work and say, it's time to go home. Or when Zhang Wanan is old and wandering around in the park, he will call her, Anan, it's time to go home. What a heartwarming sentence. If nothing unexpected happens in the future, then rounding up they will live in the same home from childhood to adulthood. Speak out and make people envious. Zhang Wanan ran towards him against the light, but when she got closer, she suddenly remembered something, and she awkwardly took back the hand that was about to hold Lu Zizhu's. Lu Zizhu took her wrist and said, "What are you afraid of? You will be criticized by the whole school." "Do you want to be famous?" Zhang Wanan repeated the question Lu Zizhu asked her in the morning. "I want to be popular." Lu Zizhu remembered Zhang Wanan's answer that morning. Zhang Wanan forcefully pulled out her wrist and walked side by side with him, saying, "I don't want you to become famous because of me." After speaking, she looked back at Su Jiaojiao and He Chiu, who were still fighting in the crowd, and sighed helplessly. "Jiao Jiao, He Chiu, I'm going home first," she shouted loudly. "Okay, let's fight for a while," the two strange people shouted in unison, causing many people to look back and snicker. Zhang Wanan felt embarrassed, covered her face, and followed the crowd downstairs with Lu Zizhu. "Where is your junior high school classmate? Why don't you see him?" Lu Zizhu asked as he walked out of the school gate. "I didn't come, maybe something delayed me." Lu Zizhu raised his eyebrows. "Can such an important thing as the start of school be delayed?" "How do I know?" Lu Zizhu shrugged. It didn't matter anyway. He was quite happy that Jiang Baihui didn't come. "I want to eat ice cream." Zhang Wanan suddenly stepped forward and tugged at the corner of Lu Zizhu's clothes without moving. Lu Zizhu followed her direct gaze and found a shop called Homemade Ice Cream over there. This store has a history of several years. Lu Zizhu has noticed it a few times. There are many people there, but he has never stepped in. First, he thinks it is unhygienic, and second, he doesn't like to eat. "It's not delicious," he said immediately after just one glance. "How do you know it's not delicious? Have you ever eaten it?" Zhang Wanan frowned and tugged at the corner of his clothes, unwilling to let him go. "Does it count if you watch others eat it?" "Lu Zizhu, do you dare to find another excuse not to let me eat? Can you please stop calling me big or small? Who allowed you to call me by my full name?" "Jojo. Jojo. Jojo." Zhang Wanan was really angry with him, so angry that she wanted to beat him up. Because she was so excited, she shouted a little too loudly, which made many passers-by couldn't help but look over. "Enan. Enan. Enan. Eat, eat, eat. Eat big pieces. Are 2 sticks enough?" he shouted back helplessly. "That's enough, thank you Jojo." The two people walked toward the store angrily, regardless of other people's eyes. "2 mung bean flavored ones." Lu Zizhu put the money on the table and said to the boss. "I don't want the mung bean flavor, I want the red bean flavor," Zhang Wanan said willfully. "Can I eat the mung bean flavored one, to relieve the heat?" Lu Zizhu said and put another piece of money on the table. Zhang Wanan rolled her eyes at him and walked aside to sit and wait. Lu Zizhu, who got the number, also followed her and put the number for the ice cream in front of her, and said angrily, "Here you are, the ice cream you have been dreaming of." "It's like someone doesn't eat." She curled her lips and said. If it weren't for Zhang Wanan, he might never have set foot in this store in his life, let alone eat it. Lu Zizhu couldn't help but click his tongue. Probably because they ate 2 ice cream sticks, the two of them lost their temper after eating. They completely forgot about the unpleasant scene just now, and held hands and walked to the new place they had agreed with the driver. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 259. Chapter 259. Xiao Jojo has nothing to eat. You're finally here, the driver said with a tearful face. Zhang Wanan and Lu Zizhu got into the car and asked calmly, "What's wrong?" The driver shook his head. "I thought you were lost, and I was just going to look for you. Today is the first day we agreed on a new location. The two of us arrived so late, so the driver was inevitably a little worried. Zhangwanan, loses who? It's okay, don't worry, we just went to eat an ice cream. Zhangwanan comforted with a smile. The driver smiled and started the car. He finally understood that going home was not as important as food. In the face of food, the safe haven of home was not comparable to food. Asterisk. You're back. Come in quickly. When the two of them got home, Aunt Lu opened the door and said with a smile. Sister Xiaolan has cut some fruit for you, go wash your hands and eat some. Aunt Lu continued. Xiaolan is the new nanny who came here half a year ago. She is much younger than Aunt Lu. She is only 19 years old. She only came out to serve people at such an age because the family urgently needed money for medical treatment. As soon as Zhangwanan heard that there was fruit waiting for her, she ran in. Luzes who helplessly picked up the skull bag she threw on the ground, hung it up, and followed slowly. You came back a little late today? Not as early as yesterday. Xiaolan walked out of the kitchen and said to Zhangwanan with a smile. It happened that Luzes who came over after she said this. He looked up at Xiaolan and reminded, yesterday I was reporting, and today is the official start of school. Oh, look at my brain. She touched her head awkwardly. There is still fruit in the kitchen. I will cut it for you after you finish eating. I will go and work first. After Xiaolan said this, she turned around and returned to the kitchen. Luzes who sat next to Zhangwanan. He looked at the few fruits left in the fruit plate with a resentful look on his face. Is it all gone? Why don't you leave some for me? Zhangwanan looked at the fruits in the fruit plate, then at Luzes who, stretched her arm forward, pulled the fruit plate in front of her and shouted to the kitchen, Sister Xiaolan, cut up another piece of fruit, Xiao Jojo doesn't have to eat it. I had nothing to eat, I had the nerve to say it, so I gave him even a piece of it. Luzes who lazily leaned on the back of the sofa and waited for the new fruit plate to come out. Xiaolan moved very quickly, and soon the new fruit plate was ready. She took it out and pushed it in front of Luzes who, Xiaozhou, your fruit plate. Luzes who was closing his eyes to rest. When he heard the voice, he opened his eyes and glanced, nodded without saying anything. Xiaolan happened to catch his eye, blushed, and walked away. Luzes who didn't notice anything. He raised his body and leaned forward, picked up a piece of fruit and put it into his mouth. Zhangwanan had already eaten all the fruits in his fruit plate, and when he saw Luzes who's portion, he couldn't help but swallow his saliva. Luzes who couldn't help but curl his lips and smile when he saw her swallowing her saliva pitifully. Want to eat? Zhangwanan nodded hurriedly. Luzes who smiled charmingly and knelt down to imitate her, taking the fruit plate over, and then smiled at her and said mischievously, it's a beautiful idea, but I won't let you eat it. Well, she shouldn't be selfish. Sister Xiaolan, are there any more fruits? Zhangwanan asked again. There is no more Anan. Okay. Zhangwanan curled her lips in despair as she lay on the sofa, stroking her unfilled belly. Suddenly, Zhangwanan felt a coldness on her lips. She raised her eyes and looked up and saw that it was a small fork. Above it was a hand with distinct joints. The cool thing on her mouth was fruit. Awu Zhangwanan swallowed the piece of fruit in one gulp. She sat up and smiled silly at Luzes who. Luzes who looked at her helplessly and divided half of the fruit in the fruit plate between her. You little greedy, eat it. Zhangwanan no longer struggled with the word little glutton with him at this moment, and picked up the fruit plate and ate it happily. End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 260. Chapter 260 A Life of Daily Necessities. Tang Yu had time to come back for a meal in the evening, but something happened and he was called away again, including Lin 11. Only Lu Lin, Luzes who, and Zhangwanan are left in the family. The three of them sat at the dining table and stared at each other for a while. Lu Lin suddenly suggested, can we not let Xiaolan and Aunt Lu wash the bowls today? How about we wash them? Have you ever touched your fingers with spring water? Loses who asked disdainfully. I don't want to sleep, let's use scissors and baggage hammers, whoever loses gets washed, it's just a way to pass the time. If one of you loses, I don't have to eat dog food, it's a great deal. At this moment, a shrewd businessman is making a good calculation. He would never let himself fall in. The two agreed without warning, shouted slogans, and took action together. 2 hammers and 1 scissors determine the outcome of a game. Jongwanan is the one who miserably used the scissors. Jongwanan looked at what he had brought out in disbelief, and then looked at the not many tableware that Lulin said with a sad expression on his face. I'm willing to admit defeat and get to work. After Lulin said this, he ran to the living room and occupied the sea sofa by himself. He doesn't care whether the person working is his son or his daughter now. He just hopes that one of the 2 people can stay away from him, so that even if he wants to eat dog food, he can't. Jongwanan was sitting there with a sad look on his face. Loses who looked at the tableware on the table and Jongwanan's face and couldn't help but smile. Jongwanan glared at him. You're still laughing, you're not the one washing the dishes, right? Yes, Loses who tried his best to restrain himself. Xiaozhou, I still like the way you look when you are cold and don't smile, Jongwanan lamented. You women are really troublesome. If I don't laugh, you still dislike me. If I laugh, you still dislike me. What should I do? Loses who thought a little tiredly. Jongwanan took a deep look at Loses who, put away some of the dishes, got up and walked towards the kitchen. Loses who glanced at it, sat down for a while, then stood up, put away the rest, and followed in. Why did you come in? You didn't lose. Jongwanan looked at him as if he didn't appreciate him helping her. Loses who raised his eyebrows. Okay, I'll go. Let's go. Jongwanan didn't care. She was the one who lost, and she was willing to admit defeat. Why did she have to drag Loses who along? Loses who was slightly stunned, thinking that the plot did not allow them to develop like this. At this time, he is leaving. Shouldn't Jongwanan keep him while shouting horse? Shouldn't you beg him not to leave? But what's going on? As if she wanted him to leave. Well, since it has already developed to this point, why not let him stay for a while? Loses who put on his gloves and walked to another sink, picked up a bowl and started washing. Jongwanan turned to look at him. Why are you washing dishes here if you haven't lost? I feel sorry for you, there are so many bowls, it seems that we should encourage less vegetables and less soup at home in the future. Jongwanan pursed her lips tightly and said nothing, but lowered her head and smiled sweetly. You go out, I can do it myself, you are a grown man, so you don't need to wash it, she said. What's wrong with men? Who said that only women can wash dishes and men should be idle? I feel sorry for my daughter-in-law, I feel sorry for you, can't I? Loses who said with a red face. Okay, Jongwanan was completely defeated by him and couldn't help but smile. Laugh if you want to, don't hold it in, Loses who scolded. Jongwanan raised her head and met his eyes. The 2 of them looked at each other and smiled sweetly. This kind of life seemed not bad, and she hoped that she could live a life of living with Loses who in this kind of daily necessities. Anan, it's time to go home. Who stipulates that only women can wash dishes while men are free? I feel sorry for you. Thinking of these words, Jongwanan lowered her head and laughed sweetly. End of this chapter.